You're listening to the Energy is Love podcast.
Like, I felt like a good conclusion.
Right, sometimes
Right?
we wrap up
Should be like, whew,
those intros for the
Right?
episodes feel like, oh, that's nice and complete.
we did it. We did
It
it.
was a great episode of the podcast. We're all done now.
Yeah.
So no, this week we're getting into another really great topic. Last week, I want to address last week before we go on, because you remember last week was power dynamics.
Yes, I do.
And that was a very interesting conversation that we had.
Yes.
I think it brought up a lot of stuff for people that listened. We had a lot of feedback on Facebook, and there was a lot of like, what is power dynamics and how do they play out and all these kind of different things. And some people have really healthy power dynamics, they think.
Right.
And they might.
They might.
Right. I thought we had really healthy power dynamics back in the day when we were, managing them from that unhealthy, toxic place.
I thought we did too.
Of.
Which is funny because my insides knew, but my outsides were like, no, this is great.
So one of the things that kind of stemmed from all of that, as well as, we're constantly sharing stuff online in a sense to just bring awareness to different things. And one of the things that we shared talked about stonewalling. It was a post that highlighted stonewalling.
Yeah.
So when I think of stonewalling, I think of that is like a subversive way of manipulation and control, right? So I'm going to take power dynamics and I'm going to, it's like the shadow side of a healthy way of working with each other, right? So if I'm going to stonewall you, then it's like what is it? I want to say ignoring, but silent treatment. Very similar in a sense, don't you think?
Yeah.
Or are they different
in
your mind?
No, I'm just like, it's coming up with a different term that's in my head right now, but they don't, it doesn't really apply to what we're talking about. So I don't want to derail there, but I was realizing the similarities between the two and how one is a preserving technique and in a really abusive, unhealthy situation. And the other is a, unhealthy, toxic trait that gets brought in. So I was like, wow, they're actually really close. And so it just sparked some curiosity in my brain. And
Are you
that's where I
talking
went
about,
right there.
About stonewalling?
Yeah, stonewalling and and the other thing that it connected to, but it doesn't fit. So I'm just like, because my ADD mind was like, ooh, look
well,
at that.
in my mind, I wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking about this anyways.
We'll start.
I just did.
No, like
so
this
whatever it has sparked in you is what I want to talk about.
No, it doesn't. It's different.
Well, at least say it so then my mind can move on and then we can move on.
Oh my God. I don't want to, because those that stonewall, that are being like the manipulative will hear that and then use that as another tool to be cruel. So
I think there already are. Babe.
They might. Well, I'm not saying it right now. They're going to have to get us on like, no.
Okay.
That was my break.
Okay, well, let's just go on to this week's episode. Go listen to last week's episode, Power Dynamics. It was a great episode, and it sparked a lot of conversation, and apparently we've got a little bit of a power play at hand right now. No, but this week we're getting into guilt trips, and the conversation...
I think that was just one of them.
Right? They're so subtle.
Nice display.
So I'm going to explain. I'm going to tell you all a little story about why we're talking about this on the podcast. And if you are a longtime listener of the podcast, you know that we have kids. We have 4. I don't know why I always have to think about that. It's not that I have to think about it. It's that I get nervous when we talk about the kids on the podcast.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about them like too much. So I'm like, where we're going. We have to, they get their autonomy.
Exactly. We used to talk a lot about our kids, especially when they were younger. But 3 of our daughters are kind of adults and they're out and they're living and they're doing their own. And then we've got our 17-year-old son that's still home with us. And the other day I don't remember the exact parameters of what had taken place, but essentially he was out spending time with friends and doing whatever 17-year-olds do, right? Which is great. And it dawned on me that I had a moment where I was like, not angry. I wanted to like stir up all of these things and throw them in his face. All of these things that we had done. All of these things that we have been doing, all of these, like all of those old adages that parents use where it's like, I keep a roof over your head, I put food on the table, we pay for all of these things, all of this stuff that we do as parents. And I paused for a minute and I'm like, what's happening like in my body? Why does this behavior, why does this not necessarily desire, but drive, subconscious drive almost, right? This thing come out of me where suddenly I can feel it too. I can feel a switch where suddenly I want to start applying guilt. I want to start laying on this guilt trip because, and then I started to reflect. I'm like, why? And I'm like, well, I'm afraid right now. Okay. And I'm afraid for a bunch of different reasons. I mean, if you've got teenagers, you know what that's all about. But I'm afraid in the moment. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Why would fear inside of me cause this reaction? So it kind of...
Did you figure it out?
Well, it created this kind of snowball effect in my body and in my mind where I started to really look at, oh, I think this is a learned behavior, the idea of a guilt trip for me at least.
Yeah, but pause before you go that. What would that guilt do to that fear? What's the role the guilt was playing? Because you were afraid.
Yeah, it was trying to protect me from the fear.
Was it trying to protect? And how, like, so guilt him for all these things would make him, like what? Like come home?
Okay. I guess in some ways it's like, you know, I'm feeling underappreciated in the moment. And that's like a common theme, is I feel underappreciated and underloved. But I don't know if that's necessarily what the fear is. They feel like they're all kind of swirling together. And so I guess like part of it is trying to satiate that need for love from him.
Mm-hmm. You know, pull him closer.
Right.
That guilt's going to pull him closer.
Yeah.
Ease those fears, pull him closer, get that love, that like now it's safe because you can.
Yes. Yeah. I think like the surface part of it, and it's always the same thing where there's multiple reasons, right? There's not one reason why I do this subconsciously. There's multiple reasons why I do it. And one part of it is because I feel underappreciated. There's another part of it that I long for his love and his connection, right? And I wish that I could feel it more from him, right? There's a part of me that doesn't feel like I'm getting that cup filled in a sense. But then like the shadow sides of it are all these things of like, you know, manipulation and trying to make him feel bad. So then he stays within our control in a sense, right? And then is apologetic for behavior. And then it's like, oh my God, I'm so grateful for my parents and everything that you've done. Let me do everything that you want me to in order
putting
to...
it on him to fill your cup.
Yeah. Right. And all of it suddenly in that moment of me reflecting and looking at all of it, I'm like, oh, this is really fucked up. And this is learned behavior. And then so then I started to really reflect back. And that's why we're going to talk about it. Because I think that it is such a subtle way of coercing and manipulating other people for your own gain, even when it's from like a subconscious need place, right? Like I was talking about where I was activated and I was afraid in the moment. Like that's the nervous stimulant, the nervous system activation, the fear part of it. And then all of these coping mechanisms that come in through that lens of guilt and manipulation and trying to get all of my needs met in those ways. And I know where it comes from, right?
Yeah.
I know exactly, not exactly, because again, it comes from multiple sources. There's multiple reasons why, but
there's definitely some really
clear,
like that you can definitely point at and be like, that's a really strong source of this.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely from my mom.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I brought that up to you the other day and we talked about it a little bit and we were like, oh, that might be a good podcast episode. Yeah. And here we are.
And you said some key words too that like hit something that I was experiencing recently. We talked about it a little bit and I'll retell it here so we can. And again, it's like, so not our kids' responsibility.
Yeah.
And it's like, they're still helping us learn, which like on one hand, I'm like, that's bullshit. That is absolute bullshit. That is not their job. And that's what's happening. So is wrong as it is and as wrong as I can make, because, you know, I can get the fuck out of myself too. As wrong as I can make myself for that. There's also, I'm like, okay, well, I can spend all my energy shaming myself and making myself wrong for a behavior and not changing the behavior. Or I can spend my energy like looking into that behavior, finding those causes and make the changes instead of being like, oh, I'm terrible for doing it. I'm terrible. Well, the world just know that, like, I know I'm tired. Like, that's manipulative.
Yeah.
Like, even just like, so you have to like, yeah, that's shitty. It's what's happening. What are we going to do about it?
Exactly, right? Accountability.
Accountability. Yes. Like the things that you said at the beginning that sparked too, like the things that parents do. And like how much we heard, like, put a roof over your head. I feed you. I do all this. And it's like, that's not something that kids are supposed to be grateful for their parents. Those are like that is the bare minimum requirements of a parent. Like, you bring a child into this world, you're responsible for somebody. You're like, your bare minimum responsibilities are to keep them safe and sheltered and fed.
Right.
And you're like, you should be grateful. No, fucker. Like, that's your job. They should feel safe with you.
Yeah.
Like, they're not failing you. If you're making them have to plead, thank you for this meal, parent. Thank you for like giving, that's, I mean, yes, they can be grateful, but like they don't have to be in gratitude and humble and bowing down. But that's how I was raised.
That's how I was raised.
That's how you were raised. And that's, there was a meme that went around a while ago and kids wanted something for Christmas. And so it was funny at the time. And I'm like, God, that's really fucked up.
Yeah.
But they went around and put like bows on the water, on the light switch. Like, here you go. This is what I'm getting for you. Like, fucker, you'd be doing that if they weren't here or not. That's so, and I'm like, I keep swearing because I'm like, ugh, it brings up anger. And it's not just because it's anger at bad behavior that I witness, it's anger at bad behavior that I portrayed. So it's why I'm so like passionate about it, because I'm like, God, that's really shitty and I hate that. But you said underappreciated, and that keyed a literal conversation that I had with him about,
with our son.
Yes. He wanted to do something that I felt wasn't safe. Like, there was a few things that we needed to check off the box. There was another parent that needed to be involved in this situation, which was very dramatic, right? And it was more needed than just the 3 teenagers figuring it out, which, they're doing a good job, almost 18, but it needed one other adult. It needed an adult on the other side. We needed to communicate. And he didn't like that. They had it all figured out. And he commented, I'm almost 18. I can make these choices. And it was really tense. And he went to his room and I was folding his laundry. And I like doing his laundry. Like, there's this part of me that's like, he's almost out of the house. I'm going to miss this. So little things I like doing. It fills my cup to be able to fold his clothes. Yes, he can do it himself, right? Topic for another day. I like doing it. The manipulative, the guilt part is sometimes I use that as a means for connection. And he was upset, so folded his laundry and I get to go take it to him. So I knock on his door because then we can I can pull that closer. I can close that gap of that separation, that fight we just had, and take it into him. And he was like ornery. He's like, yeah, put it over there or whatever. And I'm like, oh, how dare you? It's like, and I'm like, you know what? And I'm thinking I'm doing a good job. I'm clearly communicating. I'm feeling a little underappreciated right now. So it's that same thing. Because I was like, how dare you talk to me that way? How dare you treat me when I'm doing this for you? See, your brain is so like, And he starts off with, I'm almost 18. I should be able to make these choices. And I'm like, I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about the laundry. And he pauses healthily and says, okay, what do you want me to do? And I'm like, here it is. Like, what do I want him to do? What's this thing? What is the, and then as I'm trying to find the thing that I want him to do, it dawns on me, there's nothing that I need him to do different. And what it really was. And I'm like, actually, bud, I don't need you. I'm not feeling underappreciated. I'm just really sad that we're fighting and I don't want to fight with you. And he's like, okay, like, you're right. So I'm like, I'll leave now. And so I left the space, but he's like, okay, he was,
let me excuse myself. Right?
I'm like, I caught that. I'm the one that needs to be reflecting and doing things a little different here, not. And so it was like that was covered in guilt and expectations for something that I do because I like to. There's no expectations. And suddenly I'm like, you need to be grateful, meaning you need to come closer. You need to show me that it's safe, that you're not going to leave, that we're still connected, that all of that.
Yeah.
That I was then like putting on his shoulders. And he's like, I'm not playing your game. So you want me to do some of the laundry? Tell me and I'll do it. That's not it. Okay, so we're done talking right now. I'm like, yup.
Well, I think that's a big part
deal
of what guilt is. It's the inability to process and deal with whatever it is that is happening inside of you. And so you externalize it and place it out onto the world, right? And I mean, that happens in a lot of different ways. But guilt specifically, it feels so funky. Like it just feels so weird, especially when you have it interwoven with like manipulation, control, and love, right? Which is kind of like the parent-child relationship.
Yes,
right?
That was my experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we like to think that the parent-child relationship is love, and then maybe, but it's, I mean, at least in our case, it wasn't, right? Growing up for us, it was love, manipulation, and control. And then all of these really toxic, unhealthy ways that took place. And of course, like we're not going down the rabbit hole of our parents and their parents and how all of these things get passed on and everything like that. That's obvious. But I'm curious to you.
You're curious to me?
I'm curious to you.
Okay.
If you have, like, this isn't me by any means attacking, and I can go first too, right? Because I've had a little bit more time to think about this question.
Okay.
But it's like, in what ways do you experience guilt? And in what ways do you yourself use it?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because I've thought about it in the context of our relationship. And I mean, we can kind of frame the question that way too, right? Because obviously we're coming from relationship dynamics so much on the podcast. And I was thinking about, first and foremost, because guilt for me is learned from my mother, and she had a very manipulative, coercive, narcissistic way of using it. It never seemed like that to me. That's why it was kind of like this light bulb moment the other day when I had this awareness about how suddenly it's like I moved through the majority of my day in my life without feeling it. And then something will happen and a switch is flipped inside of me, and then I'll start using it. I'll start implementing guilt and judgment in order to, again, right, disconnect or not able to process what it is that I'm feeling inside. And it was so fucking subtle in my head that I didn't realize that that's what I was doing.
Yeah.
Right. I had awareness that I'm like, yeah, this is toxic. This is not healthy. Don't do this to your son. And I didn't. Like, the vast majority of the time I'm able to kind of like rein it in with him. But that has been only within the last few years.
Yeah.
Prior to that, I had zero awareness of it. And I'm sure like all of our daughters have plenty of stories of me guilting them. And I'm sure you probably have plenty of stories as well. But I'm recognizing how subtle it is. So I got really curious, and I'm like, how is it showing up in our relationship? And there's plenty of times where like I'll get frustrated doing the dishes and start running through all these things in my head about how, you know, you need to be more this or more that, or more appreciative and more loving, and all of these kind of different things because of all the things that I'm doing. But I think that has to do more with like just feeling disconnected, whether it's from you or from myself. And it's not to excuse that behavior, right? Yeah. Sometimes I externalize it and sometimes I'll voice those things, but I don't even like having that train of thought go through my head. Do you know what I mean? So I've been really practicing on trying to flip it, where as soon as I recognize, I took the trash out 4 times. All those different things that I'll think in my head sometimes. I'm like, what's really happening underneath it all? Because that isn't what's happening, right? I mean, the reality is you and I do a really good job of balancing all the different things that we have to do in our life. And so I think it is just coming from this really scared place of disconnect from you. And what's sad is that was my subconscious coping mechanism that I was taught and learned and developed and perfected, right? Where it's like, well, you want connection because you're feeling disconnected. And so my solution is to criticize you and judge you,
right?
And point out all the things that you're not doing.
Right.
That makes perfect sense.
Right.
So then I had to go.
I had the same skills. Like, I don't know why it doesn't work for you either.
Right.
Like, come on. I'm painting the picture for you.
So then I had to go a little bit deeper
Yeah.
and recognize, because it doesn't work.
It doesn't.
I
haven't found it to work either.
What it does is, see, this is like the inception part, right? Where we're going like multiple layers down, where it doesn't suddenly bring us closer together in connection, right? Yeah. It's not like suddenly you're like, oh my God, I'm so glad that you got upset and made me feel guilty because I really want to hug you and spend time with you now. And I want to drop everything that I'm doing and hang out and connect with you. Has the opposite effect. It pushes you further away from me.
Yeah.
Right? It creates a bigger bubble of like, leave me the fuck alone vibe. And inside, I'm just like, oh. So I recognize that it's like, it probably, in all likelihood, that switch that goes off inside of me, because it feels like suddenly that energy is here, and it kind of feels like a different energy than other energy, right? It doesn't feel like I'm depressed. It doesn't feel like I'm angry. Guilt feels very much like this specific type of vibration and energy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I must be like incredibly activated in a very subconscious way, where like a little 3 or 5 year old inside of me is hurt and sad. So it's like a really deep inner wound child thing when that comes out, because the result isn't what I want, right? The result is protecting the part of me that is really afraid even more, like the part of me that's really scared even more, right? Because I'm pushing you away further and further and further. So I haven't figured anything out yet, other than just all of these questions.
Okay.
And all of these thoughts and all of these like reflections about it, because the things that are standing out to me are how uniquely it feels. Like I just said a minute ago, right? Where guilt feels very different than other things. And it feels different when people are throwing it on you too. Like out of nowhere, where you will suddenly start guilt tripping me for something. I'm like, that doesn't feel good. What do you, it feels icky.
Yeah.
It's got the same type of energy and vibration to it. And so I need to get more curious, and I want to go into it a little bit deeper, like not just on the podcast, but obviously in my own work. And so I'm curious now, what comes up for you?
Oh, I can go so deep here.
Yeah.
Guilt isn't something that's like a new awareness.
Yeah.
Right? It's now let me rephrase that. It's not like, oh, I'm an expert, I don't guilt. Like, I've got a lot of history. It's been one of those, like, I want to say like my grandma. She was like a master at guilt trips and getting, like, it's not even like hidden, like, oh, my family uses guilt.
Yeah.
And there's the layer that you can see and that you're aware of,
and that they joke
and the layer
about,
that
right?
they joke about, and then there's a layer that is cognitive awareness. I'm afraid right now. I'm afraid for your safety, and I don't feel like you're making these choices for you. So I'm going to scare you, make you feel guilty for my well-being, like, and make that guilt so to try and keep you safe, right?
Do you have an example of that? I mean, just the first one that kind of comes to mind.
Yeah, the first one makes me think of. It's so hard. I almost said a name. One of our daughters, right? And afraid for their safety, their life choices. They were feeling very down, and so I didn't know how to handle it at the time. And that's a scary thing. It's your baby, right? So instead of being, let me, like, tell me more, right? That thing, tell me more. What kind of help do we, like, in hearing? I panicked and I was like, that would kill me. I could never survive that. You can never do that to me, because I didn't know what else to do. So it was like, if you hurt yourself, if you do these things, that will destroy me. Hoping to God that would be the reason why they wouldn't learn behavior, right?
Yeah. Like you said, you didn't know what else to do.
Didn't know what else to do. It doesn't excuse it. That's a terrible thing. It's like, oh, you're feeling really terrible right now, and I'm going to tell you that this is about me.
Yeah, but it's truth, right? In those moments, you revert back to your programming, right? The things that subconsciously you saw and everything like that.
So that's an example of using it with awareness, right? And then there's the whole underbelly, which is a massive, that you're using it without awareness, that you're breathing that way, that you're like, that's the way that you are communicating and working with it without awareness. And so it's those little subtleties that we're talking about now, where you start to get awareness. And sometimes you have the awareness on your own, like you did. And sometimes your kid is like, okay, let's talk about that. And you're like, thank you. I wish I could say that one came to myself, but now I have that light. I work with that, right? I can see that in other ways. So there's this whole other platform. I'm totally got stuck in that moment that we were just talking about. So I'm losing my train of thought. So how I totally got in an activated moment, and my train of thought is now gone.
You were talking about kind of like all the underbelly subconscious aspects.
Yeah, no, I got that far, but that was like the preliminary to what I was getting to talk about. Well, we'll just keep going and see if it can come up. But guilt it's a big association with like the fear, right? Mm-hmm. You're afraid. So guilting to create security, whether it's about abandonment wounds or it's the fear of like the safety of somebody else. And then there's the really unhealthy things, right? I don't want to have to do this, so I'm going to make you feel like shit, so you do this for me.
Right. I
don't want to have to be accountable for anything, so I'm going to be shitty as I want to be and then make you feel bad for it so I can keep being shitty, and I don't have to change my behaviors or count. Like there's so many different like colors of it. And then there's also like the confusion of guilt and shame that comes from a lot of trauma. And where you were the one responsible, right? Parents put too much responsibility on you. And when things like went wrong, it was your fault. They were fighting because of you. Mm-hmm. They were being abusive to you because of your behaviors. If you say anything, it's going to cause the abuser like way more torment than you're receiving. Oh, the abuser had all these bad things happen, so you should feel bad for them and let them keep abusing. Like all of these things. So you're just like, oh, it's my fault. And really, it's just all that shame, but you feel like it's guilt. And then when that carries on, when you see things going wrong, like what do I have guilt for, right? If something goes wrong, if you're hurt, if one of our kids don't have what they need, if I can't, like, there's these guilt things that come up. But a big majority, like that's another, there's so many different colors and nuances. Another way that guilt shows up when you, I can see like bringing guilt to somebody else too when you're feeling guilty about your inadequacy. Like the garbage, right? You're like, took out the garbage 4 times.
Guilt about your inadequacy. That's interesting.
And so like, what are you feeling bad about not doing that? You're like, hey, why aren't you appreciating me for this? Because there's times that I see stuff and I'm like, why isn't he? And I'm like, oh, I'm really feeling bad about all the things that I feel like I'm not showing up for and the way that you're doing stuff. Guilt is tricky. Guilt has a lot of different colors. Speak to that more. That's
triggering, not triggering in a bad way, but that's tingling something inside of me to the inadequacy part.
Okay.
Because I think I do that.
Let's see. I want to remember another part too.
Do you need some writing down stuff?
Yeah, I might have already forgot it though. Let's see. Thank you.
Some paper.
Shit, it's gone.
Some writing down stuff.
I'm using all my brain power. I can't remember words like paper. If it'll come to me, I'll speak to it as it comes. But for right now, this one is like, for me, example, like if you get upset about taking out the garbage, like there's a part of me that gets like that defensive, right? And I'm like, I'll start like there'll be a tally of things that I've done that you haven't done. Okay. So I'm seeing that. So that's my immediate defensive. Like, oh, well, you're not. But what it comes down to is I'm actually feeling guilty for not being able to, like come up with the content to figure out stuff with these like LLC thing, the tax, to be able to like all of our business stuff. And then I'm feeling guilty for getting wiped out. I'm feeling guilty for when I need to check out and be on the couch. I'm feeling guilty for all the ways that I feel like I'm not showing up at the capacity that I want to show up. Which, by the way, the capacity that I want to show up is I'm never tired. I'm never irritable. What I think I should be doing is fucking possible. But I still have that because I feel like you deserve a partner that can do that.
Wow.
And I'm not doing that. So I'm feeling like really terrible. So kind of when you like, sometimes I'll get mad at you for the stuff that you're not doing. And then I'll realize that I'm just feeling bad because there's like, I'm not able to show. I'm failing on these parts.
This is tripping me out right now.
Okay. No.
Keep going.
Oh my gosh, it was that thing that I was going to mention. It came back right there. And then it went away again. Okay. I'm feeling bad about the things that I am not able to show. This thing that I'm going to say is going to be prominent because it's came to me 3 times and I have like, it'll leave. It pops in my brain and then my shadow is like, no, I'm pulling it back. And I want to say it so bad, but I can't remember it again. Okay, it's gone. So
it never dawned on me, and whether it did at some point, like if you're like us, we have all of these like aha epiphany moments that happen, and we've probably had them like 15 times already in our life, right? With things that come back around again over and over and over again. But there's sometimes where like we've never heard this piece of like this is brand new information, and then I'll get like a Facebook memory from 7 years ago where I posted the exact same fucking thing. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Maybe I did know this at one point, but I don't think it ever dawned on me, or I never put the pieces together that I will guilt you because I feel guilty about what I haven't done.
Yeah.
Right.
Or maybe about what you have done, like unhealthy behaviors. Does that ever like hit that too?
Yeah, for sure.
Me too.
And it's like, that's interesting, where guilt, it's the same thing too with shame that I think I thought of the other day, that because I was sitting with shame and thinking about how we just hand shame down from one generation to another.
Yeah.
And it's like that game of hot potato where nobody wants to hold on to the shame. So we avoid it and
make others shameful.
Exactly right. You're like, I've got a bunch of shame for all of my discretions and all the things that I've done and everything like that, but I can't process and deal with it. So instead I'll just throw that shame onto somebody else and blame them and shame them. And guilt, I think, is the same thing, right? Where it's like, I'll feel guilty because you do all the laundry, like all the laundry. The only time we've been in this house for almost a year, and I've probably done less than 5 loads of laundry, right? Truthfully.
Oh, yeah.
You're like, I'm not, you're like, I realize that truth because I do all the laundry. And I feel really guilty for that. And I have this thought process that happens to me every time I feel guilty for that. And I'm like, well, I don't remember the last time she changed the oil in the van. When was the last time she changed the oil in the van? And then the part of me that asks that question is like up on its high horse. And I'm like, you're right, Craig. She's never changed the oil.
I'm never going to.
Right.
I'll drive it to somebody to change, but I don't know how to do it. So I'm comfortable taking that task, but we're going to pay for it. I'm like, I'm cool with that.
No, I save us like $5 when I do it myself. So it's totally worth it.
It's totally worth it.
But the whole idea of, oh, I feel guilty for this thing, some action and behavior that I've done or haven't done. And instead of sitting with that, here you go. I'm going to make you feel guilty for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fucked up.
There's a thing that we have begun implementing that we've done. And you've done it and I've done it. Now, is it something that we need more practice at? Of course, because healthy behaviors and actions take practice. Yeah. We're really, really good at the unhealthy ones, right? We have been practicing a lot, but when we shift that behavior and we get a new one, those take practice because we have years of practice doing it a different way to catch up.
I know, it's so funny too. Like that's a good reminder for all of you out there listening to, right? Like healing, change, all those kind of things. Like if you're 40 years old, we're in our early 40s. If you're as old as we are, you have been implementing really unhealthy, toxic behaviors and practicing them on a daily basis for like 35 plus years. Which means if you want to replace those with healthy ones, you can kind of roughly estimate that it's going to take you 20 or 30 years before they're like the go-to easy, like instantaneous, subconscious thing that you do rather than having to consciously be like, okay.
Right. You're not going to get it in a week.
Exactly.
And maybe it won't take that. Maybe it won't take 30 years. Maybe it will, but you're not going to get it in a week. Maybe you will. Good for you. Right. I'm so excited that happened for you. And I hope that keeps happening for you that way.
Write a book and come on the podcast.
Right. We want to talk to you. What are your tips and tricks? But it's like the behavior, the action isn't where it starts, but we often think that's where it starts because that's where the effect ripples out outside.
Yeah, that's where, catalyst moment. So
we do this behavior, this action that now we have consequences for. It's now affected somebody else. They're like, we've hurt somebody, or we might lose somebody because we haven't treated them, the way they deserve with their boundaries. So all of these things. So the behaviors and actions are where it always starts. So like, I don't like you behaving that way. You need to act differently. And then you think that to yourself, I don't want to behave this way anymore. I don't want to act differently. So I'm just going to change my actions. I'm just going to not guilt. But what happens is these behaviors and actions are the end point, right? They're the end point. It's the thought process. It's the self-worth, the self-belief, the feelings that come up, the suppression of the anxiety, the anger, the whatever is coming up that you don't know how to feel or sit in, that you don't think you're allowed to, that creates this like vocabulary, this narrative in your head, these feelings in your body that twist you, that give the chemical releases that gets to the point where you have this action and behavior. Now that doesn't take away responsibility. You're like, oh, I can't help it. It's not up to me. That's not what this is. This is like looking at it with like stepping out of it and looking at it for what it is. So you can see where changes need to be made, because you can say, I'm going to change my behavior. And you usually do, right? For a week, maybe a month, maybe you got really good at it for a
2
year.
hours.
But then you didn't look at what you're feeling. You didn't look at what caused the thought process. You didn't. So it's like all of this stuff that starts to come up. So when you're practicing new healthy behaviors and healthy techniques, it's this internal thing, because you're practicing new ways of thinking. You're not riling yourself up or taking yourself down these other ways, because your thoughts, your feelings, you're catching the way you're feeling in a different way. So it's a lot of work. But one of the things that we have done that is different from guilting somebody about what they're doing, about what they're not doing, to try to get a different action based off of what you need. But there's times you need your partner to step up differently. You need changes to be made in the relationship, and you have to be able to communicate that to them. And that's the difference, because we like, oh, that's guilting, that's nagging. Not when you're asking them for a conversation and you're saying like, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling like all of this is on me and I need help in this relationship. This behavior, this action is starting to like hurt me and have an effect on our relationship, and I need to bring this to. So there's like, we'll hear that part of us that guilts ourselves to, like, oh, I check. If I bring something to my partner, I'm guilting them, so I'm not supposed to bring it. I'm like, that's not it. There's these healthy ways of communicating, but when you don't bring it to them, you don't find these healthy things. That starts to stir up and build and resentments, and it's taking on its whole little life, which is how you then throw out that guilt. And again, it's another way. These are like there's these subtle nuances, because there's so much of it that you have awareness of to a point. Yeah. And then things that you had no awareness of. That how could you not, right? The thing with our son and the clothes. I'm just like bringing him his clothes. Mm-hmm. Like I didn't recognize how shitty that was. Now his clothes, like he's fine right now, but they're sitting in the room, because like I want to make sure that I don't ever use something that he didn't ask me to do. It's not a way for me to gain access to him. Yeah. And that's really unhealthy to do. Like to gain access needs to be like, I want to spend time with you, not here, I'm doing this nice thing for you so that you'll give me some attention so we can have a communication, because I want to spend time with you. That's no wonder that feels shitty. Yeah. Like think about the nice things that people do for you and you're like, please don't. That's not helping.
Can you think of...
I said a lot. Let me exhale for a little bit.
You're good. Exhale. Take a drink, baby. I'm sitting here and I'm having a really, not necessarily a hard time, but kind of a challenging time here trying to think of ways that this plays out in our relationship. And I can see it clearly with the kids. I can see how I experienced it as a kid growing up with like my parents and how my parents still do it, right? Okay. Like, do you remember before we came to this place that we're at, Tennessee? We went to lunch with my dad. And my dad laid like this ginormous fucking guilt trip on me before we left. Like, okay, I love you, bye. You better call. Like, make sure, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, fucker, right?
On top of that, not even acknowledging, I got a little bit of resentment.
Anyways, how does this play out in our relationship? Okay. How has this shown up in our relationship?
Well, you brought up garbage, so we can look at like stuff around the house.
Yeah, what's the underlying thing there though? Right. That's like the surface level stuff. That's what I'm thinking about. And maybe we don't want to go in too deep to this stuff.
Yeah, I think right now, if we're going to really like look at the stuff that's like that we're not seeing, if we're going to do some shadow work on this, like I don't want to hash this out for the first time on
the podcast. Okay. That's fair.
We'll probably talk about it after.
Yeah.
But
no, that's fair enough. Yeah. I do feel like it is playing quite a big role in our relationship right now.
Yeah.
Does it feel like that way to you?
We both have a very strong foundation of using guilt. So
we did come from a long line of guilters.
So the fact that we're like, is this maybe a thing? Only the couple of things that I have awareness of.
Yeah, just the trash can, the dishes, and the laundry. That's
it. That's it. There's nothing else.
Okay, so maybe we do need to do a little bit more work. Because what you just said, right? We are bred from master.
We're probably guilting each other this whole time right here, thinking we're just talking.
Right.
And people listening are like, dudes.
You're like, if you guys want to hear an hour-long guilt trip.
Right.
Tune in.
I think they're being accountable and bringing stuff to light.
I think, truthfully, Steph, me asking that question and you recognizing and saying like, oh, I think there's probably a huge, like we just opened up a closet inside of our relationship where it was like shadow, right? Everybody's hiding out in our closet.
They're like, fuck, they opened that door. God damn it, everybody.
Right? That's the other thing too, is it's so slippery. Like it's such it is just easily covered up with other things.
Well, like guilt, judgment, right? So when you start to feel the guilt, you pull out the judgment.
Yeah, they go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And I'll do the same thing, right? As soon as I feel like you're judging me, I'm like, here comes the guilt. I got the counter for that.
There's times, babe, like it's so like this will be a really big thing for us to go because I'm sure I see it in you, so I'm sure you see it in me how that goes. But like I think we're having a conversation, like being silly. I'm not in a passive aggressive like I'm jabbing you, right? Not that thing. But sometimes jabbing somebody else, we're like, I can't believe the child did that. And I've touched on something that you're feeling guilty about, that you're feeling pressure about. I have no fucking idea. Yeah. And all of a sudden you're activated. You're feeling like I'm guilting you. And I'm just like, what? I didn't know that was okay. That's just, I won't bring that up. I won't joke about that. I didn't. So there's times that if you wouldn't have said that, I wouldn't have known. And every time I would have like, how silly is it that they think this is, we're not doing this. Because if you don't joke about your kids with your, I don't know how you're getting through. We have to tease a little bit.
Yeah.
And be like, this is what they came up with.
It's a requirement.
Right?
In order to survive.
But that made you feel like I was
trenches.
Guilting you. Right? Because you have a thing of you're feeling guilty about with that. I had no awareness. So I'm like, and you're like, this makes me feel like shit. I'm like, okay, I won't do that. I won't bring this up in that way. Not that I'll never talk about it, but I was having fun. Right? So there's those things that are, because we laugh and joke and banter with each other. So there are those things that are so like under the layer that you feel like you're getting guilted on. And that's happened here too. Cause I'm like, what do you mean by that? And you're like, what? I'm like, you just said that like all of that weight. And you don't think you've like, that wasn't your intention. That isn't even where your energy body was. There's a difference between those jabs when you're being passive aggressive and they respond to it. Like, damn well you were taking a jab and then they caught the jab. So it's that different thing of being like, oh, okay, where did that come from? Because that frequency is so, like, we didn't know. It was covered up by a bunch of shit. And now that we've uncovered a lot, that frequency is like, hey.
That's where it was, huh?
Hey. Did that make any sense?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I said complete sentences that whole time or if I just gave a lot of sound effects.
I mean, it made sense to me, but I speak Steph. It made sense, baby.
Okay.
You're good.
Okay.
The overarching thing that I keep coming back to, the thing that I believe, after talking about this a little bit longer here, and as well as kind of reflecting back while we've been talking about it, is how closely related it is to fear.
Yeah.
And I think that the majority of the time I can kind of boil everything down to, I'm afraid in that moment of something.
Exactly.
Right. And a lot of times, because I'm trying to think about it from the perspective of you and me, right? That big conversation that we'll probably avoid for another few years.
Maybe.
In regards to our guilt. But I think it really boils down to fear of losing our relationship and losing each other, and how we're coming from those places oftentimes. And then it's like, why don't we talk about that?
Right.
Instead of push each other away with all of this guilt and judgment and shame, right?
It's how we're protecting ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
If we're afraid that abandonment's coming on, that loss, we're isolating.
Yeah.
We're making it our choice. There's so, like, all the layers.
Yeah.
All the layers that come with that, where we isolate for protection because we were isolated, or we were only safe when we were able to have isolation.
Mm-hmm.
When we were around others, we weren't safe. So that all the layers that goes with it.
Well, I want to publicly announce on the podcast.
What? Is this something I need an opt-in for?
No.
Because I got a little nervous.
I'm going to work harder at that, babe.
Yeah?
Yeah, I'm going to work harder at that because, truth be told, I don't want to push you away.
Yeah.
I don't want to distance. You know, there's definitely times where I'm very hurt and wounded and afraid and scared and defensive and all of those kind of different things too. But at the end of the day, and when like the dust settles, I just want to be closer to you, and I want you closer to me. Like, you are safety to me. You feel good. Like, I want your love. Do you know what I mean? Our relationship and everything like that just feels like this incredibly loving, sweet place. And I want to be in it. I want to be around it. I want to have all of that wrapped up in our life forever. I don't want to push you away. So I'm going to get really curious to the best of my abilities and see what I can come up with and see what I can do, and see when I am bringing forth and feeling those guilt things, ask myself, what am I afraid of right now? What am I afraid of right now? What am I afraid of right now, right? Because I believe that oftentimes that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
Well?
I am in this with you.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Good. You wrote down something.
I did. Oh, that was it. We got to it. It was the instead of guilting for not doing, it's the calm communication of like needs, because communicating your needs is a healthy thing.
Right.
Guilting somebody for like
Like you said,
just listen to the podcast. I don't need to rehash it. We just talked about it. You know what I mean? If not, I'm sorry. Not everybody speaks stuff.
So we threw this out on the socials as well before we recorded, and we got some feedback from people. We're going to read off a couple of different things. Sorry, I'm pulling it up on my phone. This is from Lisa. Like, somehow I was supposed to be the best daughter, and I was supposed to make my parents happy. Oh, by the way, like normally at the end of episodes, we do a Q&A, a question and answer portion where we answer somebody's question, and you can call those questions in and everything like that, right? This one we're just using some of the stuff that we got regarding guilt trips. So it's from Lisa. Like, somehow I was supposed to be the best daughter, and I was supposed to make my parents happy. My issues are not their concern, but I am supposed to be guilt into loving and serving my parents. So old school crap, so conditional. Love is conditional, right?
Like, that's...
We've experienced that with both of our parents. And this is the really shitty thing that we know about ourselves too, right? Mm-hmm. Which means we also went ahead and passed that one down to our kids. And the idea that love is conditional, I think that to me still comes from that place of fear, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, not only am I worthy of love as long as I meet all of this criteria and all of these conditions, right?
As long as I don't matter, but I caretake to their needs.
Mm-hmm.
So I put myself aside and only be what they need.
Mm-hmm.
If I can be what they need, if I'm good enough, if I'm worthy enough, then I get their love. All of that conditioning. And
then also, I think that message then gets internalized where we won't give love unless it's under the right conditions, right? I'm not going to give you my full heart or my full love and awareness and presence in this relationship unless you meet all of these criterias, right? So it is a very conditional relationship.
Yeah. I think I see the part of that. I do. Can I speak to that just a titch?
No.
Okay. It's going to be a tangent probably, so it's probably fair not to.
Of course you can.
It's when you like there, because there's that push pull, and of course that's going to be a factor. But I think the first thing that you would address in that situation of when you're dealing with that conditional love is how like that has continued on, how your relationships have continued to be where your needs don't matter, where you've pushed yourself, even like you feel them, right? So you might have that guilt that comes up. You might have those little jabs that come out, but your needs haven't mattered. You put yourself last for everything. You always put them first because that is the only way that you believe you're going to get love. So when you come into relationships, you set up those dynamics because you're like, oh, they need this. I'll provide this. Therefore, you have love. I need to not be this. I need to push this self aside. I will do that in order to get that love. So there's so much of the self-sacrifice, self-sabotage that will come into a play. And that is like a really big thing to look at because then you're like to try and be like, actually, no, that doesn't work. And to start to look at yourself and allow your needs to be met. And like it's really scary because like you might lose that person. I don't want to lose this partner. If I'm really me, I'm going to lose like these people in my life. And the truth is like you might, right? Because they might not align with who you really are. And you're like, well, fuck that. I just won't be who I am. But that's like that painful, miserable, like, and if you choose to do that, like, I'm not saying you're painful or miserable. Like you get to do that for as long as you want to do that.
Yeah.
And you might get to a point where you no longer want to do that. And you want to be able to have your needs mattered, have your needs met, not have that conditional love, have that where I'm going to be me. And then that does open up. So there is that part of where they probably don't get your whole heart, even though they have all of the heart that you're able to give, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And they get everything, like you give them everything that you have to give, but there is that like reserve. And so it's really, there's so much work to be done in that space of, I'm losing you, huh?
You're not losing me at all. Sorry, my body language, but
Okay.
I'm just getting comfy because I got something that I want to say, but you're fine.
Okay, I'll wrap it up. The thing to start looking at is, like when you feel like love is conditional, you've also made yourself conditional instead of like, so stuff to look at there.
Say that again.
When love has been conditional, you have made yourself conditional.
Yeah. I think that because that concept and idea of love is conditional,
Mm-hmm.
I think like real intimacy and love and connection is conditional, but the conditions are like safety.
Yeah.
And do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not going to open up and allow you into my heart and into my space and into my love and all of these kind of different things if you're not a safe person.
Right.
Like just from the sense of like the nervous system, right? You can't both be constricted and like you can't open and contract at the same time.
Right.
And if you're contracting because you don't feel safe and you're in a survival state, then it's kind of hard to open up and receive as well as give.
Unconditional love does not mean that you don't have boundaries.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah, and you can unconditionally love somebody from way over there.
Yeah.
They don't need to, you don't need to be
Yeah.
in a relationship with them for that to happen. So interesting.
It's like loving somebody in person, base of like you get to be you, but that doesn't mean you get access to me.
Right.
Or I'm in your space. Like, yeah.
So like unconditional love
Doesn't mean you accept abuse.
still has conditions to some level,
Yeah.
right? To some degree. Like if we think about it from this perspective, and I'm thinking about it from this perspective of like, you know, energetic, universal, purest form of unconditional love from source
Mm-hmm.
is that it's unconditional.
Yeah.
It's just unconditional, right? It is there. It is ever flowing. You're made of it. You're connected to it. You always have it. That's what it is. That's the jam of this dimension in this universe in this reality. And then like the lowercase LOVE, just love, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is very conditional. you're not going to love me unless I fit this criteria. And that might...
That's not accurate.
Hold on. That might look like, yes, some people might have a list of like, do you remember like not your top 10 list when you were in middle school, but, like your ideal list of who your partner would, well, first and foremost, like, by the way, I don't know about you, but my partner looks like you, like that. My ideal partner looks like Stephanie.
Nice.
Anyways, there's a whole bunch of things where it's like, my love isn't something that I just give to you freely. You do a really beautiful job of cultivating and creating the right container for it to happen in conjunction with me, right? We do that simultaneously with each other. And there's conditions to that. We have to show up, right? We show up on a regular basis to cultivate and create this container and the love and the safety of our relationship. And condition, right? It's semantics where we're getting into words here where, well, maybe it's not conditional. Maybe it's this agreement that we have with all of those kind of different things. But in some ways, it's not just this, because I'm thinking about that from the perspective of the child, where in theory, you should have unconditional love from your parents, but almost immediately it's obvious that you don't. And suddenly you have to fit into their parameters of what it is, their conditions, their structures of what they expect in order for you to then receive their love. And as soon as you don't do that, they're like, wait a minute, you're in trouble, there's an issue, here comes guilt, whatever else, right? So it's interesting to think about how do we love somebody unconditionally in a place where we need structure and like conditions and a container for that love to exist. Does that make sense?
Yeah, to a point. I'm going to give you some pushback.
Okay.
Because, because this is a 2-person podcast. I think this is a really like tricky place where abusive tactics come in of, oh, you don't love me. You don't unconditionally love me because like behaviors are there. And you're like, my love is conditional. If you did things, I wouldn't love you. And I think the truth of that is my love is not going to stop in that moment. Now, if you do things to hurt me, if you do things that have violated my boundaries where I'm not going to be in a relationship with you anymore because you've caused immense pain, that doesn't mean my love stop. What that means is I still love you. My heart hurts and you no longer have access to me. Our relationship ends. And over time, my love for you is going to change. Over time, that's going to hurt less. Over time, my love for you is going to shrink into where maybe there's a part of me that still has love for you. And maybe there's a part of me that forgets you. Like, and I'm like, oh yeah, like there's a part. That doesn't mean that my love was conditional because you made choices that you made that changed our relationship. And I think that's a really unfair thing to put on somebody that, oh no, your love was conditional. Like, no, my love wasn't, but I didn't, like, you made the choices that you made and I loved myself and made choices for me. My love didn't change, but our relationship changed. And with us not being in each other's space, with the distance, then my love shifted and it changed. It didn't mean that I loved you less because you don't get that same love or access to me now.
Yeah, I totally agree, babe. Okay, we got one more. This one, somebody called in and left us a message, but when you do call in and leave us a message, just know that there's like a 3-minute time limit. And if you have to call back, that's totally fine too, right? Sometimes people will call in and leave multiple messages. That's cool. This person left a message and they got cut off. And anyways, I'm just going to kind of summarize in hopes, right? Because right at the end of the message is when they got cut off and they were kind of doing the same thing where they were summarizing their question. So I'm going to do the best that I can. But
some people are long-winded. It takes them a long time to get to their point. I don't know who can relate to that.
So Stephanie called in this question. No, this came from somebody that followed us on Facebook, and we appreciate it, by the way. Essentially, they were in a relationship and they loaned their partner some money. So they're in a relationship and their partner needed some money, so they loaned them some money. They would use their partner would then use that as a way to make them feel guilty every time they brought it up. So it's like, hey, just letting you know that you still owe me $200, and they're like, why do you always bring that up right now, right? And then suddenly they flip it, and now that person is the bad guy. Eventually the relationship ended. It's probably for the best. Well, I don't know if it is for the best. I apologize. I apologize if it was a hard ending. They would like, so this person believes that they like to offer help and be of service to others, especially in relationships. But when they express that they are overextending themselves, so like essentially speaking a need and a boundary, right? Then they are getting questioned and it's turned around on them. So getting it flipped around on them. So that's like classic gaslighting. And when I say classic, I don't mean that in a sense of minimizing it, like it sucks.
Yeah.
And so their question, and again, I'm kind of summarizing it the best as I can based off of their call. They got cut off, but what do I do and how do I address that behavior so that I can change? Like, what can they do to change it? Not necessarily, obviously, the other person's behavior, but I think they're asking kind of in that space where I want to be loving and kind and of service, but I don't want to get hurt in exchange for it. So what am I doing that is creating that in that dynamic back and forth there where I'll put myself out there, but then if I speak up and say, hey, this is a bit too much, then the other person is manipulating it and flipping it around on me. So what's the first thing that kind of comes to mind?
A lot to unpack there. I think it's so loving and it's so kind to want to be there for people.
Yeah.
To want to be of service. That's such a sweet thing to have about you. And there's a point of when we cross that line within ourselves of where we are feeling like those acts of service are the only thing that we're good for. Like we don't deserve love if we can, or maybe like there's a part of where you have to, I guess you don't have to, there's a part of where we would invite you to get curious, about what that feels like in you. Just for starters, like you're in a relationship, partner, they need some help with that, and you were able to provide that. So that was probably a dynamic where maybe you felt really good about like that. It's like if that was, of course, like you and I in a relationship, right? We do that for each other. There's also, but it's not like I'm loaning you money and you're loaning me money.
I get what you're saying though, of course, right?
But like, so I'm trying to be careful on my speech. Why am I trying to be careful on my speech? Okay, the point blank is, did you really want to? Do you really want to do these things of service, or do you just want them to respond with a action for you? Do you want them to, like, you do this thing for them, so then you're guaranteeing love? And that's a really like hard thing just to say right out the bat. But sometimes like that's a way to look at it for ourselves, because personally, I have done that. And I'm like, here, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to do this thing.
It's the people-pleasing thing, right?
Very much. Yeah. Like, this is going to make me safe. You're going to like me. I'm going to be safe. You're going to love me. I'm going to be safe. Not going to hurt. Like, of course, I'm going to give you this. Of course, I'm going to give you this. And then there comes a point where like, there's nothing left. And it's almost like instead of having these external things that you can offer, you're taking internal chunks out of yourself and like, here's this, to where there's nothing left. Yeah. And then when you dare ask for something back and they're like, oh, like that's not how this works. This relationship is a you give and I take. Right. And don't ask for that to come back, because there's such an unhealthy dynamic of where it really felt okay for you to give. So the invitation would be to get curious and to be like, there is a boundary to be found within yourself of what feels healthy for you, like areas that you want to give. And if you are in a space where you want to give that, are you okay with not getting it back? Are you giving to give? Or are you giving? And now when you have that like agreement that it's going to be paid back, again, that's on the person. The thing that's really standing out is it feels like, maybe I'm way off here, but I'm just going to go with it. Like this really big lump in your throat and your chest of where you don't want to show up in that way, but you almost don't know how to not show up. You feel like that's your contribution. That's the way you can. So when that feeling comes up, it's okay to say no.
That's what go ahead.
Oh yeah. No, it's okay. It's okay to say no. And it's going to be really, really scary and really hard when they get mad. It's going to be really, really scary and really hard to face, and trying to figure out how you're going to feel about your emotions if they do pull away. And it's finding the security in yourself where you're worth it, even if you say no and they get mad and pull away.
Yeah, it really made me think a lot about, and I know that it's a different relationship dynamic in a different context, but it's like, the mom that's trying to take care of their whole family and providing for everybody and cooking all the meals and doing all the laundry and making all the beds and cleaning the whole house, and the kids don't do anything. And the husband, yes, I'm sure the husband's doing something right. He's going to work and all these kind of different things. But in that classic stereotypical nuclear family type dynamic where the mom is just running herself ragged, taking care of everybody, and then she like loses her shit because the one thing, the straw that broke the camel's back, and then everybody's like,
what's wrong with her?
What's the big deal with mom?
She's pretty crazy.
Gosh, relax, Mom. What's the big deal? We're trying to watch a movie right now and you're flipping out because the popcorn burned in the microwave. Relax. What's the big deal, right? And that dynamic of showing your love through those acts of self-sacrifice, I think probably stem from a deeper way of like, that is in some ways your definition of love and relationships, right? That you don't understand how to be in relationship differently than that.
Yeah. Because
that's what was modeled in behavior, shown for you growing up. So then, like you said, right, you got to get really curious about what that would look like and what it feels like from the get-go of being like, if I don't meet that need, then am I still lovable? Right. Am I still worthy? Am I still a part of this relationship?
Or maybe you think that you're selfish. Like, if I don't meet that need, I'm selfish, I'm greedy, I'm not showing up for other people. All those stories that still kind of comes into that of why it ties back to worth.
Yeah. So a lot of times I think that's probably what's driving a lot of those. I know that I get driven by that behavior a lot.
Yeah.
Where I will do things because that was how I was taught. Right. But I have to really consciously look at it and see, wait a minute, that's not the definition of love that I want. That's not the definition of relationships that I want, which means I have to set some boundaries. I have to, like, there's a lot of times, and I don't know if you've noticed this past year or so, I have consciously stepped back from like fixing things when you voice frustration about something, or when our son will be like, hey, I got like, today's a great example. He came out and he was like, hungry. I'm going to eat some breakfast. I'm hungry, but I don't feel like cooking. And then I'm like, oh yeah, cool. And then he's like, well, I guess I'm going to cook this stuff. And I'm like, okay. Like normally he would say that thing and then I would just jump up and start cooking him food. And instead I'm just like, yeah, well, let me know if you need some help. And then just left it. Right. And that was really hard. And that's always hard. And I do that with you too, where you bring a need to the table in some sense. And I'm like, I'll fix that for you immediately, because then you have no needs that need to be met and you can just love me. So it's a great question. And as always, it's always probably going to be a multitude of different things. Right. And like you said, just get curious about it. And thank you, by the way. Thank you for calling in. Thank you for reaching out. Everybody that wrote in and reached out and called in about the guilt trip episode of the podcast, we appreciate it. And as always, like, if you have ideas that you want us to talk about on this podcast, if you have ideas about the episodes that we do, and maybe this one sparked something for you, reach out. You can email us. You can contact us via any social, like shoot us a DM. And of course, you can call in and leave a message for the podcast as well. So, in closing, guilt is connected to fear. And if you're guilt tripping people, you're really afraid. Period. Dot. That's it. Let's go. That's it.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the fix.
Okay.
So
that's the fix.
No, I'm teasing.
What was the fix?
I'm teasing.
I missed it. To be fearless. Thank you, everybody.
And go to our website and sign up for our newsletter so that we can tell you about all the cool things that are coming next year, because we're excited about those.
Are we gonna do our tagline, our new mantra?
Do we have a new? Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Here we go. Should we? Ready? Let's do end every episode with this.
Okay. Let's do it.
Like legit. That's a great fucking thing.
It was. I'm following your lead, babe.
Okay. So our new motto that hopefully we'll remember next week is expect the best, plan for the greatest. Did we get it right?
We got it because I wrote it down.
Oh, perfect.
Last time, that's what reminded me. I'm like,
I think I wrote it down too.
Did you?
Anyways, we'll talk to you guys next week.